Some people like to buy insurance for various things. Health insurance, travel insurance, home and contents insurance, life insurance. But have you ever wanted DAC insurance? You've probably never heard of it, but today's channel sponsor, no, I'm kidding, there's no DAC insurance sponsor for today's video, and that's probably because DAC insurance is free. Well, sort of. You see, if you'd like to be covered for any future updates and upgrades to DAC technology and not have to worry about constantly buying the latest and greatest DAC every time there's a new Pro, Plus, Ultra, Mark X version, all you need to do is buy this. This is the Schiit Yggdrasil Plus DAC. Specifically, it's the more is better version, but we'll come back to that. The Yggy retails from $2,299 depending on the version you buy and the colour you choose. There's black and there's silver. And it's quite different from a lot of other DACs out there in a few ways. I think the most significant difference to most people will be the fact that the Yggdrasil Plus uses Schiit's own proprietary multi-bit conversion process. To do that, they take either 4 Texas Instruments DAC 8812 DAC chips, that's in the less is more version, or they take 4 DAC 11001B chips if you're buying the more is better version. And they take those chips, whichever 4 it is, and they combine them with some proprietary filters to then hand you your music. Those proprietary filters do something quite novel by taking the original un-oversampled or non-oversampled signal, basically whatever's come into the DAC, and combine it with some oversampled processing of the same signal, and the output of this, according to Schiit Audio and Mike Moffat, who designed these filters, is that you're getting an output signal that is both frequency accurate to the information that came in, but also time domain accurate, and that's really important. If the timing information is correct in what comes out of the DAC, it's going to give your brain a better chance to piece together things like spatial cues in the sound. It's going to improve timbral accuracy or tonal accuracy in the sound. There's lots of stuff that our brain does with accurate timing. And messing that timing up by even just a fraction of a second is enough to do things like smear imaging, reduce soundstage depth, and throw off tonality and timbre of instruments. In my experience, the results of this process are always excellent across every multi-bit DAC that I've tried from Schiit Audio. That includes the Modi multi-bit, the original Bifrost 2, the upgraded Bifrost 264, the Schiit Yggy multi-bit that I had once upon a time, and then the Schiit Yggy OG, Yggdrasil OG, and now the Yggdrasil Plus. So the abilities of the DAC design itself aren't really in question for me, I know that already. The bigger question was whether the more is better version really is better, or if it's just marketing speak. And all of this is before we even get to the coolest feature of the Yggy Plus. What should we talk about first? Do we talk about the sound quality or the coolest feature? I think we'll go with sound quality. I don't have the less is more version to compare with the more is better version that I've got here, but I do have the Yggy OG. The Yggy OG is the direct ancestor of the more is better, and the Yggy OG was the only version available before Schiit started producing versions such as the more is better, the less is more, the more is less, and something in the middle is average. And believe it or not, only one of those names is fictional on my part. The Yggy OG was already a beloved DAC before Schiit Audio started playing word games, and the OG has comfortably held its place in my collection as my favourite DAC at around about that $3,000 price point. And that's while other wonderful DACs like the Denafrips Pontus 2 and the Holo Audio Spring KTE have come through across my desk. The OG version uses the same unison USB input that's in the more is better, and that again is a Schiit proprietary development. It's galvanically isolated, meaning it's going to keep all the noise out of your system that could otherwise come through from USB cables. It uses a different DAC chip in the form of the analog devices AD5791, but both of these DACs use 20-bit DAC chips and 4 of them in each DAC. It's using the same filters and the approach to the decoding of the sound, and as far as I know, even the analog stages are the same. And so the point here is that other than the old case design and the old circuit board layout, essentially the only differences between these two DACs, as I understand it, is the DAC stage itself. In other words, the chips and the circuit board they're placed on. What matters most though is that the Yggy OG has consistently delivered what I consider to be the best bang for buck performance anywhere under $3,000. In other words, I haven't been able to best it without spending a whole lot more money. Until now. The More Is Better version that I've got here costs just $100 more than what the Yggy OG cost when I got it. And I think a lot of that's going to come down to the fact that the casework is actually simpler now. I really like the look of the new silver finish. I don't know which I prefer in terms of the overall design and styling. I think the older version was probably more sophisticated. The new version's much more simple, but that's also relevant to what is the coolest feature of the Yggy Plus. And if changing the case to something a bit simpler from a design point of view keeps it cheaper, I'm all for that if the sound quality is just as good or better, and I've already given it away, it is. The first thing that you'd notice if you compared these two side by side, that being the Yggy OG and the Yggy Plus More Is Better, is that there's now a difference in tonal quality between the two. Whilst the Yggy OG had quite a full-bodied presentation to its sound, the new MIB version is a little bit leaner and a little bit more neutral. It comes across clearly more textured sounding as a result. I say clearly not to suggest that the jump is huge, just that it's obvious. These two DACs are more alike than they are different, but they're definitely different. I never felt that the OG was too far from neutral. I could hear that it had a slightly weighty presentation, but it never sounded like a thick, rich DAC. It didn't sound like some of the R2R DACs, say the Pontus 2 that I mentioned before. That was clearly a coloured sound in a wonderful way. The Yggy OG never went there. It just came across as a bit big-boned, whereas the MIB comes across more athletic, leaner, and kind of wiry strong as opposed to muscular like the OG. Both, though, sound fantastic. The bass from the MIB is a little bit tighter, a little bit more controlled, but it also lacks a little tiny bit of the weight of the OG version. Which one is better is a decision that you'd have to make for yourself, but ultimately I don't think you can go wrong with either. It's not like it strays a long way from neutral in either case, and if anything, it's probably to say that the MIB is closer to neutral, whereas there's that slight weightiness from the OG. In terms of separation and layering, that's where the MIB does start to pull ahead a bit, and it delivers a greater sense of the space around each instrument and therefore the separation of instruments, not just from left to right, but also in terms of layering and depth in the soundstage too. And so overall, the OG comes across just a little bit more intimate sounding. The position of the sound or the sense of how far away you're sitting as a listener from the stage is the same between both. That doesn't change. But the OG's slightly more intimate delivery means that you've stayed in the same seat in the auditorium, the stage is in the same place, the musicians are basically in the same place, but on the OG, it's like they've all just leaned forward a little bit. They haven't taken a full step forward, it's not massively closer to you, but it does sound like they've just leaned in. Everything closes in a touch to make it a more intimate sound. This is where things start to get really interesting though, and I've never noticed anything like this in my 15 plus years of reviewing audio gear. When you compare the OG and the MIB on a track like John Henry, the OG separates sounds in a sort of curious way. I'd never ever noticed this until this comparison, and I've used the OG for a few years now, but from the OG, Harry Belafonte's voice in this track sounds like there's a bubble around it. It sounds like it's been recorded in a booth, a recording booth, separated from the other instruments. Whereas this is very much a live recording on stage with him singing next to the other instruments. Switching to the MIB version, and the vocal is clearly still separated from the other instruments, but you can actually hear that it's on the same stage as the other instruments in the sense that you can hear the room, you can hear the space that they're all in together. And in fact, in that respect, the MIB separates the sounds even better. So even though there's this sense of almost a bubble of separation on the OG version, with the MIB there's more space, and that gives you a greater sense of overall separation. And I think ultimately what this comes down to is that with the MIB, you can hear the room better. You know where you are when you listen to the OG. You can hear that it's a live recording, for instance, with John Henry, but in the MIB version, you can hear where you are. You can understand the acoustics of the venue a little bit better with the MIB. And it fills in the gap of that kind of mental sonic image that the OG might have just skimmed over a little bit. And so what all this tells us is that the Yggdrasil Plus MIB version is a seriously good DAC. It's comfortably better than an already stellar performer in the OG, and it only costs $100 more. I also compared the Yggy Plus MIB to the wonderful LAiV Harmony DAC. It's an R2R DAC that I reviewed just recently, and the Yggy and the Harmony DAC went toe-to-toe in that review as well. I'll link you to that review at the end of this video if you're interested. But at this point, I wanted to know just how good the Yggy Plus is, specifically the MIB version. So I did something a little bit silly and compared the Yggy with an astronomically more expensive DAC. The Chord Dave costs about $14,000 US, making it about 6 times the price of the Yggy here. We all know in this hobby that 6 times the price doesn't mean 6 times the performance, but what does it mean? Running the tubeless consensus USB cable into the DAV, running from my PC, which is equipped with high quality JCAT, USB and LAN cards. I compared it to the Yggy Plus, which was receiving the digital signal via a Supra AES cable, and that was coming from the Singer SU6 DDC, and then both DACs were connected by curious RCA cables to the LAiV Amp 23R, driving the Focal Utopia 2022 edition. Just like with the Yggdrasil OG comparison, the first thing I noticed again here was tonality, and specifically that the Yggy Plus and the DAV are basically identical tonally. Next, I noticed that the soundstage is shallower and a bit narrower from the Yggy Plus, and that's to be expected because it's an area that the DAV really excels. But that's also where the significant differences ended. The DAV does deliver some extra fine details and nuance in instruments and vocals, but it's all very subtle stuff that will be easy to miss. The DAV has a certain delicacy to sounds like cymbal hits or the percussive sound when someone first hits a piano key, and the Yggy Plus can't quite capture it in the same way, but again they're very, very subtle differences. Thanks to the soundstage being larger, the DAV separates sounds a little bit better because there's more space to work with, and so the DAV is definitely and easily the better DAC, as it should be at 6 times the price. The key takeaway here though is that once you get beyond soundstage size, the differences are very subtle. And you're probably only going to notice those subtle differences on a really high-end system, and even then probably only on great recordings. In those situations, the DAV is clearly and easily the better DAC. But for many people, and probably the majority of music, the Yggy Plus is already enough to absolutely blow your socks off. And that's before we talk about the very coolest feature of the Yggy Plus. On the spec sheet, things are fairly ordinary. There's a remote control now that wasn't available on the original Yggy versions. Inputs include USB, coaxial, optical, AES, and BNC, which is great. It'd be fantastic to see I2S, and some people might want for Bluetooth, but you get that. And then regardless of the input, the Yggy will accept up to 192 kHz sample rates. So you won't really be able to get the most out of something like HQ Player, and you won't be feeding native DSD into the Yggy. You'll have to have it converted to PCM before it arrives at the DAC. You do get 1 pair of XLR outputs and 2 pairs of RCA outputs, which is great. It's a feature I love about the Yggys because it means if you've got multiple amps like I do, you have one DAC that can feed many of them. You can also switch the phase of the signal and turn on a non-oversampling feature, which is nice, but it's also features that many people probably wouldn't miss if they weren't there. And so that's pretty much all there is to talk about, except for the fact that what makes the Yggy so cool, and why I say that it's providing you with DAC insurance, is that its design is completely modular. It's completely upgradable for both hardware and firmware. So if DSD suddenly experiences a phoenix-like emergence from the ashes, or if all of the streaming services in the world start suddenly prioritizing super high sample rates above 192 kHz and it becomes almost mandatory for DACs to have high sample rate capabilities, then Schiit Audio could go and produce a new DAC card and you could buy it and install it yourself, and the Yggy Plus will keep rocking on. If there's some massive technological breakthrough in digital input technology or analog output technology, Schiit Audio could produce the appropriate cards for those, and again you could buy it, install it yourself, and continue to rock on. If there's a way to improve the functionality of the Yggy through a firmware upgrade, you'll just be able to download it and flash it yourself. In short, this DAC will be whatever you need it to be 10 years from now. Not many DACs, in fact possibly not any DACs, can really say the same. The fact that it's then also offering sonic performance that's as good or better than any other DAC that I've heard at or even slightly above the price is the cream, the cherry, the sprinkles, and the little funny wafer straw thing on top. So yes, what I'm saying is the Yggdrasil Plus MIB version is brilliant, hands down. So if you want to secure your digital audio future, you can check the links in the description down below. For now, as always, thank you to channel members, thank you to Patreon members, and thank you to those of you that leave super thanks on videos just like this one. If you're curious to know more about what I think is maybe the Yggy's strongest competitor in the LAiV Harmony R2R DAC, I'll have that appearing up here for you on most platforms, so you can click on it now. In the meantime, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.